say for the last 10 years, like in my work and in my life, overlapping an interest in maybe like a pathological interest in um, epic experiences, and I would even, sort of ego death kind of experiences. And I mean, I think it's interesting in the sense that I feel like there's like a popular interest in these things right now. Plant medicine experiences. And so, yeah, like about 10 years ago, I did this project where I wrote letters to private space travel companies suggesting an artist in residency in outer space. And that was at a time where I feel like that's basically happening now, if it hasn't already happened. At the time that, it was sort of a new thing. And um, yeah, so I wrote these letters suggesting myself, volunteering myself. And I think there was a part of that for me that was stemmed from reading about like astronauts who had been to outer space and who had seen the Earth from above, and reading about the way that they try to describe these experiences and the way that they stumble for words. And it sounds very similar to reading about, like Zen enlightenment experiences and like big religious experiences, and the way that, people kind of like struggle to put language to that. Um, and it's common enough among astronauts that it like has a term. It's called the overview effect, and they sometimes call it cosmic consciousness effect. And so I was just like interested in that, and I sent these letters, and then while waiting to hear back, which I still am, um, I was like, you just kind of like just researching the concept, and found that the like NASA like gives you like astronaut, like you get like your astronaut badge like if you go to, it's called the Kármán line, and it's the official line that delineates the Earth's atmosphere from outer space, and it's 62 miles above sea level. And so when I read that, I was like, oh, that's like not very far actually. And so I'll just go there myself. And so the project kind of turned into this walking project where I was just kind of like keeping track of miles on my phone and just kind of like accumulating um, miles in my daily life. And the idea was to walk the distance to outer space and back. And so then that kind of turned into kind of just naturally morphed into this collection of objects. And I just started like just the way that you notice something on the sidewalk and pick it up. And so I sort of started accumulating these objects. And um, so the end result of all of that was this piece that has been shown a few different times, but in a similar way, in different contexts, where it's these like objects that are these like collection of objects that are like in a spiral on the gallery floor. And the viewer can walk along them. And it's kind of like, I was kind of thinking of it like, I was reading Rebecca Solnit's book, Wanderlust, about the history of walking, and reading about labyrinths and the way that the idea of a labyrinth was like a pilgrimage for people that can't go on pilgrimage for whatever reason, like financial or physical limitations. So it's kind of um, this like epic walk in miniature. And so that's what my project turned into. And yeah, I share all that because at the same time that I was making that, I also had this really, really powerful experience at a like silent meditation retreat that was specifically for artists, run by the artist Ernesto Pujol. And it was a really like powerful, beautiful experience. And it was so powerful and beautiful that I wanted to do more silent meditation experience, which led me to Vipassana. Um, which I had a really different feeling about. And yeah, and like plant medicine experiences. And so it was like a time in my life where I was like exploring that kind of thing a lot. And um, so I definitely conceived of, many years later, pregnancy and childbirth and like new motherhood in a similar way as like an opportunity um, to be ground to dust and remade again. And
I was struck. The reason I wanted to ask you about this, and actually what sort of sparked my interest in having this conversation was you were talking about just the things you've been saying now, but you were sort of talking about the experience of having birth as basically a kind of ego death, right? Like the intensity and the pain was so excruciating that you experienced this sort of almost transcendence.
yeah, okay, let's go there. It really was. Yeah, I mean, it's like it's a weird thing. I feel like it's a weird thing to talk about because it's so common. So many women have had some type of experience of giving birth or many experiences, and yet it seems like so unique and um yeah, idiosyncratic and like unpredictable and uncontrollable. And yeah, I definitely did feel like this like true like just being truly out of control, like truly I can't control what's happening here. Um and yeah, like a level of pain that was just beyond anything that I'd ever experienced. And like in that it did feel like I had people in the room with me, but I felt supported by the people in the room with me and like really appreciative. I guess I can say looking back in the moment, I don't know that I had like feelings of appreciation, but looking back, I'm like, I really appreciate the role that these other people played. Um, but also in the moment, I did feel kind of like alone but like alone with myself, not like alone, like I'm like just not like in any of the negative senses you might have of that, but like alone with, the cosmos or something. Um, and yeah, like that I was kind of just like participating in this thing that was, yeah, sort of happening through me. And I don't know, it's like really hard to speak about without cliches, I guess, because again, it's like I feel like it's a common enough experience. People try to put words to it, and it's hard to find those unique words, which I guess brings me back to what I was saying before about how it's hard to talk about these like sort of like epic cosmic experiences.
Maybe there's something there with art making, right? Well, specifically your work, you sort of sought this sort of ultimate experience, right? Like, okay, what's the most intense thing? You could going to space or having experiences with plant medicines and meditate and long meditation retreats and things like that. And I wonder how, I'm just curious about how your work, how you think about the experience of making art. Do you still think about it in that context of going to, I suppose, extreme places or extreme, looking for states of being that are unusual? One thing that strikes me about your work is that it's very, you make these objects which are beautiful, but there definitely is an underlying, like a very, to me, a very clear idea. And I don't want to necessarily call it conceptual necessarily, um, because I think now what is, I think trying to sort of like call art any one thing is doing it a disservice, but there is the heavy element of the idea.
Yeah. Yeah, I also hesitate to call my work conceptual, although I think it's like a fairly decent label of all the labels. But yeah, it's very like I'm very interested in the process. Actually, I usually kind of is more of a process and then like maybe like an artifact of a process. And I'm very interested in material and the meaning of material, the materials that I choose, and kind of the processes that they go through. And yeah, I mean, I would say that now I mean, since giving birth and then being in the space, um, I mean, I guess you're sort of always postpartum, but like in the early postpartum window is also like is more of, like giving birth is this like intense, yeah, ego death kind of experience. And then the period after that is a more slow, grinding, ongoing ego death. And and so I've just become really interested in like trying to express that and all of a sudden feeling like, wait, where is all the art about this? Totally like major part of the human experience. And I think in a way, I probably hadn't been that interested to like seek it out. On one level, there's probably a lot of art that I don't know about, but then also, of course, all the people deep in this experience are very busy doing other things besides making art. Um, so yeah, so I've been, yeah, I guess the work that I've been doing since then is, yeah, is kind of like, has been trying to find a way to describe the experience of pregnancy, giving birth, early motherhood, kind of like, like in the language of the work that I've made.
So what are some projects you feel strongly about and that you've done in the past?
Yeah, I mean, along those lines, I think about like another thing that I've been thinking about reflecting on my work is kind of moving away from grids, which I still rely on grids and I love grids, but for a long time my work um I've made a lot of work using newspapers like as a substrate and as a subject, and so they just inherently are full of grids because that's how humans, particularly like in the Western world, typically design things, right? So the newspaper is like columns and like squares and rectangles, and it looks also like the built world. Like I think when you like the work that I've done with that kind of does basically I've done different processes of kind of redacting the text. And so they end up also looking like the built world, like architectural blueprints. And yeah, and so for like many, many years, that seemed like one of the strongest features of the work that I was doing was kind of like reflecting on that aspect of human culture that's full of like 90-degree angles. And an example like of yeah, example of work that I've done in that way would be like I'm still doing work like this where I cover all of the text and all of the images with silver leaf, which was something that occurred to me wanting to reference like medieval um, illuminated manuscripts and also medieval paintings that use gold and silver leaf, more often gold leaf, sometimes silver leaf, as like a stand-in for heavenly space. So like instead of having like linear perspective or even like the earliest linear perspective, but or even just like any kind of like background, just having this like flat surface of gold leaf, let's say, representing kind of like heavenly space. So I wanted to bring that reference to contemporary context and um, yeah, and along the same lines of, yeah, this idea of like wanting to connect with something cosmic. And so for me, like Silverleaf in particular, the kind of silvery, it just has like a space travel kind of look to it, but also is reflective. It kind of becomes a mirror and it quiets all of these stories and they become, yeah, to me, kind of like this cosmic space. And so I was doing that for a long time. And then, kind of like after some years of working with that, I started occasionally leaving images. And it felt like at first, like I was like breaking a rule by letting something be uncovered. And the images were always of something like from the natural world.
This
And
would have been from the newspapers.
yeah, images in the newspaper that like it's like I would cover up everything. They become these very like minimal um, images, but then I would start to leave the occasional actual picture, like photograph from the newspaper. But yeah, always from the natural world. And so I feel like for me that was like a little bit of like when I look back on my work, like when I'm making it, I feel like I'm, like trying to process the world and trying to understand myself and my relationship to things. And then when I look back, it's like a little more clear because I can look back and I can see like slowly moving away from the grid or having like space for other things besides the grid. And so like after kind of the first incarnation of that project, there have been like many incarnations of that, and I'm still working with that. But after the first incarnation of that, I started doing a project where I was like burning the newspapers. And so then it was I wanted to again take this, the newspaper as location of human culture, both in kind of like the grid thing that I was describing, but also thinking of course, like stories and like what's important and who decides what's important and issues of, kind of censorship and propaganda and gatekeeping and just even like narrative in a general way, taking these stories and then wanting to make a comparison with something bigger. And so for me, that meant like it was like this project where every new moon I would burn a stack of newspapers. And that was actually just, that was the idea. I just wanted to do that. And as I was doing that, I was like, oh, well, now I have this like pile of ash. That's like interesting in a way, like maybe as like a sculptural material, like pile of ash. And then eventually that turned into making the ash into ink and using the ink to make drawings essentially. But they're like I fold the newspaper like I take newsprint size of the newspaper, fold it like a newspaper would be folded with this ink inside, and then they become these sort of just like abstract Rorschach type of drawings, and they're like very organic. So so that felt in a way like I figured out a way to like use my like gridded material and just like demolish it and have it sort of reborn in this like totally organic form. And so then since then I have like new processes in the process that I'm using now that are also like very organic, and like the imagery in the end is like very very organic. And so I just look at that and I kind of look at that as my own path towards many things, like leaving the city is one of them, and realizing that I wanted to be kind of have more access, um, to the natural world, and then also bringing me to like pregnancy, birth, and motherhood, and now being like totally immersed in just the physicality, the unpredictability, the sort of uncontrollability of all of that. I feel like, yeah, I was sort of getting there, getting there through my work.
Just seems like there's like a correlation between working with the grid and right angles and using newspapers and architectural ideas, and then that sort of like became sort of inverted, right? Or the core,
Yeah,
yeah.
yeah, totally. It's like I've always been interested in kind of that tension between, I guess you could say like culture and nature. I don't really like that exactly, but just like, yeah, the tensions of how humans inhabit like our environment, which is a lot of building, building buildings around us to sort of
A lot of right
keep
angles. Yeah,
a lot of right angles
yeah,
and a lot of like separation, like creating a lot of
yeah.
separation. And so yeah, I feel like I've been interested in that tension for a long time. And like over, maybe the last decade, it's kind of like leaned like the actual work that I make is leaning more towards like the organic side of things and like more away from the kind of grid side of things, which is still there. I love a grid.
I loved the pieces you showed at Rick Wester. There's a gallery that you had a solo show not too long ago, and you had these sort of marbled, um, paper, these beautiful, it's funny, I don't know, I like that I don't know what to call them, drawings or prints, because they're not really prints and they're not really drawings, but you've sort of marbled this paper, and they're very the forms are like very much, it's doing what it's doing. Your hand is there, but it seems like it has a sort of autonomy.
Yeah. I also don't really know what to call them. Let's figure it out. I guess technically they're monoprints, but I feel like they're not really what people think of, like the process of making a monoprint, is they're not really that.
That's a good thing, I think, if
Okay,
you
we're
can't
not
define
solving
it
them.
accurately. I think, yeah, that's a good problem. Not
Yeah,
yeah.
yeah. I guess I kind of think of them as drawings, but yeah, that's what I'm really working with now, which is yeah, the most just like organic forms that I've used. And I have been interested, like with the project I just described of making this ink and making these Rorschachs. Like, of course, there's a lot of that. Like, there's some parts that you can control, like how much ink and kind of where it lands on the page or whatever. But then ultimately, the end result is like always a surprise. And so the process I'm doing now that you're referring to, yeah, is even kind of more so this process that has a lot of elements of, yeah, of chance, I guess. Um, so it's it started with my interest in using these sounds that I had come across, and I didn't actually know like the form of the project at all, but I had just come across these sounds of unknown origin from outer space and from the deep sea. So they were sounds that scientists had collected in like various projects, like NOAA mapping the ocean floor. They have this archive on their website of all these interesting sounds, and they say, here's what probably produced the sound. And then they have a few where they're just like, nobody knows like what made the sound. And likewise, NASA has some sounds like that. And so I loved just thinking of, um, the farthest reaches of human interaction with our environment, and and then just beyond that, right? Because there's this element of like we can't really understand what's happening. And so that just to me was so I just really wanted to work with those sounds, and I kind of just sat with them for a while. And then it occurred to me to try this project. I basically learned this process, paper marbling, which is a process that has histories, Asian and European histories, but most often people will be familiar with it from like old books, like beautiful books with like leather bound books. And like the end papers will be this just like decorative pattern paper. And so that process is it's like a special kind of ink that floats on the surface of water. And then there are all these techniques to create certain patterns. And so for me, the ink is floating on a tray of water, and the tray of water is resting on speakers. And the speakers are playing these sounds, and it just basically like agitates the surface of the water and just kind of sends the ink swirling. So they end up looking like they're just like a lot to do with like the way that water moves, and patterns in nature that you kind of repeated patterns, these like swirling patterns, they look a little bit like waves crashing, or like the way that water will carve a river into the earth, like when you're like looking from above at the earth, or kind of like topographical maps. And they're all unique. And yeah, and then it's just captured on a piece of paper, and that's kind of the monoprint element.
Well, it seems like you're really sort of interested in some of the deeper mysteries of the universe,
I am. That's what I'm interested in.
which I greatly appreciated. And I love the way that it comes out in your work, and these, you're thinking about an idea, like what about these sounds? And it's nice the way that you sort of like trace these, have these trajectories, and it seems like you're sort of carried along with it. Like maybe you have one question, maybe it starts with a question, and that leads to this project, and then that leads to another thing and another thing, and it seems like a very uh intuitive process, but it's also like there's a structure,
Hmm.
but it seems open still.
Yeah, I love getting carried along when you said that. I love it's so fun getting carried along by an idea and not knowing what's next. And then, but I wrestle with it. I guess that's the structure. I like to reel it in and I like to like once I choose what to investigate, I like to really go for it.
I
Um,
think you have to, right? Because there's so many possibilities. You can get inundated
yeah,
with that.
exactly. Which comes back to the beloved grid. Like it's nice then to be like, okay, like I'm going now that I found something interesting, I'm going to, you know, like kind of repeat and see what happens like in this world.
Maybe it's about control in a sense.
Well, I think that the fascinating thing about paper marbling, and this was kind of coming up with like the Rorschach tape drawings, which I'm also still working in that way. But I just think that's like the beauty and the fun of paper marbling is this like little dance between what you can control and what you can't control, and very relevant to motherhood. And or and just like interacting with like humans and with yourself. um but yeah, I mean it's like I'm choosing the colors, I'm like mixing colors, I like choose a color palette, I choose obviously like the size and the size of the paper, and I have really like worked hard to get just to get a grasp on the tradition and the technique so that so that there's as much like kind of as much control as I can have, and then ultimately in the end, yeah, they kind of make themselves. And then there's editing too, because it's like I don't like everyone.
You have to edit. That's so
Yeah.
important. Yeah.
Yeah.
A friend of mine was saying that artists, fellow artists, was saying that artists are a very poor judge of their own work.
Mm.
I don't know what do you think about that?
Well, I mean, it's really hard. It is hard to tell when you're in it because, like, even just for these, like, I was just working on those in my studio, and then kind of the last step is I have to like um, smash them flat, under because the paper all is wet, so they kind of get dry to a certain degree, and then I just have to like in my makeshift way in my studio, I like heap like my entire contents of my bookshelf on top of this like stack of papers, and then I'm like, I'm glad to have a few days before I look at them, because I also feel like at the time that I make them, I can't really tell
Yeah,
what
I was
happened.
listening. It's funny you mentioned. I was listening to this podcast with Matthew McConaughey on Rick Rubin's podcast. It
Mm.
was a great interview, and he was talking about reading a script at like all these different times of day, like reading a script like early in the morning, late at night, when he's had something to drink, when he's hungry, when he's after he's eaten, like in the shower. I guess he was laminating the script, whatever it is. But it's like he was really trying to get all these angles to to get the feel of the character.
Yeah. I love that because it's like also acknowledging that you're like kind of a different person in these different ways. And when you're like, yeah, when you're like hungry versus when you're full. And like, yeah, that makes total sense to me.
Maybe you didn't sleep well one night, you're going to see it differently. Obviously it's not going to look as good, or you're in a good mood for the
Yeah.
sun's shining, some all that stuff.
Totally. Well, it's kind of nice that whole range because I also think I feel like it's easy to think like that you should sort of try to limit your like judgment to when you're like well rested and well fed and in a good mood. But that's maybe like again, this circles back to motherhood. That's going to be like maybe not the majority of experience. So to also maybe welcome the whole thing. But I like the idea of kind of, yeah, almost being your own, it's like you're almost your own chorus of opinions there by just like checking something out at different moments,
Yeah,
different,
for sure.
yeah.
So speaking of trajectories, did your work with, you mentioned that they sort of use this marbling technique in bookmaking, um, and you've been producing your own books. Is that correct?
I have been, yeah, I have been, actually, it kind of like I have kind of always. I feel like in a way that's like my first art form because I like made my own magazines as a little kid and I like made zines in high school and I sort of just love the form of the book. But also it's tricky to show the form of the book. So I feel like a lot of my work, like obviously using like newspapers as a substrate, is like very directly, referencing the newspaper. You could call it a book. But then usually those works end up as like, framed on the wall. But actually, when we were at our fabulous makeshift residency in 2020, I started I started more things sort of return to their original form as a book, and I think it was a matter of just having time to make some things that I had been wanting to and just, just like didn't have the time.
I remember that. And before I forget to say this, thank you for making that happen because it was the best summer of my life. You know, that
Oh, the
that
best summer
church,
ever, right?
it was the best. It was truly the best. We had David and I, David Greenwood, uh your partner, partner, husband, what should I
Yeah,
say?
yeah, both.
Both. Okay. Well, so he and I were just reminiscing about how great that was and how, there was a trampoline in the space. We had the rose window. We had our little cubicles where we made, and that's what I think of when I think of when I think of what you were making, I think of those books in the church. And I believe you were
Yeah.
using silver leaf on some
It
of the
was. I
edges,
was
right?
using Silverleaf and yeah, best summer ever. When I think back on that time, I kind of like the whole thing is like contained in a snow globe in my mind. It's just this like just perfect scenario with this like amazing like architecture, like amazing space to be in, and then our pond. I think of it as our pond and the trail that was like right over there. Just like the perfect mix of elements, cool people around, and
But we had each other. It was beautiful.
it
Like
was.
we and so many people were so isolated. It was like peak COVID, but we had this
Yeah,
this really tight group and we go
yeah,
on walks together in the evening and just we did our own thing in the day. It was
yeah,
very much an artist residency that we sort of that happened kind of
yes.
naturally, yeah.
I know, as life should be. It was like this little like microcosm of like dream world. Yeah,
It
working
was, yeah.
what you want to be working on all day long, and yeah, and then kind of like connecting in the evening.
Yeah, and you have this, you could have this. That's I think as an artist, that's I mean, you can have that through a residency, but it's almost
Mhm.
like a glimpse to me. It's like a glimmer of um, what life could be like. What like the we're lucky to experience to have that experience, and as artists in general, to make our own creative work, where it's such a privilege, but to have a slice of
Totally.
that, right?
Yes, I mean, I do feel like every residency is some version of that where you're just like, okay, here's how life should be.
And I truly wish that everybody could have that experience of just being free and creative, but I think and
I
it's.
It's tricky, right? Because it's pretty, mm, it's just probably not a lot of people get to have that be like a full-time life experience. Maybe some people do, um, but
But that
yeah, I mean, I think it is really special to have like the way I think of it is like this. I mean, just the experience just is the experience, whatever it is, like at a residency. But then the way that maybe it can function in the rest of life that's not at a residency is just like I guess an ambition or like a dream of like, can life be a little more like that? And to me, the communal aspect of it is, just feels so right. And this actually dovetails perfectly with the conversation about motherhood, because I know that's like a really common lament, and I totally get it of in parenthood. Of just the feeling that like you're so obviously not supposed to be doing this like alone or even like in a nuclear family type context. It's like I feel like it really puts you in touch with just the the just primal knowledge that we're like meant to be living life in these like like small like kind of close-knit groups. And so I just feel like having these little like tastes of that, I don't know, it's almost just like a reminder, and what you do with that in the rest of life, I don't know. I'm always working on it.
Yeah, we're an isolated culture. I think there's not a it's no coincidence that there's so much anxiety and depression and other mental illness at the same time. There's increasing isolation and so forth. We're
Exactly.
tribal still. We want to be in these small groups, and I think historically humans would never would have been alone.
Never would have been alone, would have
Yeah.
not been alone in the context of like alone with a baby. Like that's a totally insane modern invention. And I think you just feel the wrongness of it when you're in it. Like that is just not the way it's supposed to be.
You ever listen to Gabor Mate? Do you know
Yeah, I
the
would like
yeah,
him.
he was
Yeah.
talking about a tribe that I can't remember the context of this, but he said that they didn't put the baby down for the first like 2 or 3 years of their lives. So
Oh
somebody
yeah.
was always holding the baby.
Yeah, and it's interesting when you traverse the world with a baby, with like a little baby, and there is just they do just have this kind of like aura of magic, and people are, just drawn to you and like want to see your baby and meet your baby and then when it's you holding your baby all the time, you just like can't. You just literally it's like so exhausting. But it's like everybody wants to do it. Like it's a joy for like so many people. And again, if you were in the context of being surrounded by those kind of generations deep, like family and friends, there'd always be someone to like joyfully, happily hold the baby while you do something else.
I
And
will confirm that when I've hung out with you and David and Wilder does have an especially strong baby magnetism there.
she does, doesn't she?
Yeah, she's like the Gerber baby or something. There's some like
Yeah,
some magic dust.
I know. She's pretty sweet.
So how long were you in New York? So you move the summer of 2020 when we were at the church in Troy?
Yeah, I guess
Was
I was
that
in New
basically
York
your
for like
yeah?
about a decade.
So
Almost a
you
decade.
left basically at that point, 2020.
Yeah, yeah, it was kind of back and forth, but essentially.
You went to graduate school in Cranbrook, right, in Michigan?
Mhm.
So did you go directly from Michigan to New York?
I did not. None of my paths are direct. I, well, I did right after grad school. I had a year where I did some residencies, kind of my like own design, and then some like official residencies that I was in. And then I was in Baltimore for a couple of years, and I worked at the art school there. And then it was from Baltimore that I came to the city.
So what were you doing where you work you what kind of jobs were you working in the city?
I started out art handling. I was art handling like after grad school, and that's what I was doing at the art school. And then I was also working for this great like art handling company that had a lot of contracts with like the Smithsonian's, and I was like traveling to DC doing that work. And then that company had a branch in New York, and I moved. It kind of worked out to, I was like interested in living in this city. But then I had an opportunity through the fellowship at Smack Mellon, the like year-long kind of studio fellowship that they do. So that was kind of like a good opportunity to come to Brooklyn. And then I continued with that same art handling company and then did other like kind of freelance art handling stuff for a number of years before. And I was always like teaching here and there, but then the teaching kind of became, it's like what I do now.
Mainly your teaching.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's great. That's great.
I'm done breaking my back in art handling.
I don't blame you. It's not it's a rough room.
It
All
was
right.
like really fun. It was like really fun at the time, and yes, I've moved on.
Yeah, yeah, that's good. So and you've been in Kingston now for a couple. When did you buy your house?
Yeah, been in Kingston for like about 2 years.
And you like it?
Well, bold statement. Yeah, no, there's like a lot to love about Kingston. I feel like I'm still getting to know it. I moved here and then I immediately got pregnant. I was like really sick during my pregnancy, then I had a baby. So I've been busy and I feel like I haven't really like I feel like I'm just getting to know it, honestly. But yeah, but where I live is like it's like an amazing block. It's like really cool people, new cool people moving to the neighborhood. It seems like every week, like friends from the city that are coming up here. So it's yeah, it does feel well, for better or worse. There's lots of Brooklyn imports, including my friends. So I love that. And and then it's like all the people that are interested, I think, in coming up here are interested in the the sort of easy access to like nature trails and that kind of thing.
So there's creative. There's a reasonable creative community up there, right?
It's like a very substantial creative community. I feel like I'm just getting to know it. But yeah, for sure. There's like a lot, there's like a lot of cool galleries. Yeah, committed artists for sure.
That's great. That's great. And it doesn't have the, I mean, obviously you're not going to have the same sort of amenities that New York has, but you're, I mean, you're quite close. You're close enough where you can still come down and have shows. And you were recently, you
Yeah.
came for
Yeah, that
the,
was kind of the appeal. It's like an
yeah,
easy trip to the city. So, yeah, because actually I loved when we were living in like the Troy area. I actually really liked that a lot. I was really interested in maybe sticking around up there, but I felt like it was a little far in terms of getting to the city.
yeah, it's about accessibility, right? In a sense, if you can be, I mean, we all want to, and I guess it's like it's an age thing too. When you get to be a certain age, it's like the city is gets more difficult. Just the sounds and the energy, you shift. I feel like there's a when you approach middle age, there's I've noticed in my own sort of physically and psychologically, there's a shift where you seek nature more.
Yeah, well, I remember when I moved to Brooklyn, it took about 12 hours before I was like, oh, this won't do. I was like, wait a minute, it's so noisy. It's so
Yeah.
like, where are the trees? There's plenty of trees, but not where I live. Very
Yeah, yeah.
lack of trees. Um, but more than that, I remember just like observing the sort of rush hour march to and fro the subway of like everybody just this like stone face, like I just remember being like, oh, there's something. I think there's just like an exoskeleton required, I think in many ways. Um, that to me like felt immediately like this isn't like quite the place for me. But then of course on the other hand, it's like so much fun. There was just like I mean, I stayed there for a decade because there just kept being compelling reasons to do so.
Yeah, I mean, there's so many great people. There's the art, there's the
Yeah,
museums, the culture, the shows, whatever, all that stuff.
no place like it.
Oh, it's true. It is. I still love it. I still love it. And it's not an easy place, but
Yeah.
there's so much uh creative energy here. You just tap if you tap into that, if I think it's a matter of it's like surfing or something, it's like
Yeah.
knowing which way how to ride the wave.
It's really true. And I noticed that when I would have friends from out of town visit and stay with me, they would come with this like itinerary of like all the shows and everything that they're going to go see. And I would like follow them around and have this great time and be like, this place is so fun. But then when I was like in my, regular life, that was sort of that experiences like that were sort of few and far between.
It's always fun to host in New York because
Yeah.
you tap into that energy of wonderment.
Yeah, totally.
So you grew up, do you think part of I think for me and perhaps for you as well, maybe you can correct me, but I feel like growing up in a rural place in the Midwest, you grew up in South Dakota,
Mhm.
that kind of like, for me, it made it difficult. I grew up in it wasn't kind of rural. We had a little pseudo farm, we had, like horses and some chickens and stuff like that, and it was in like Northwest Indiana, but very very much not New York. So I feel like coming here, you had an extra difficulty, an extra sort of like hurdle of getting over this, of just getting acclimated to the energy of the place.
Yeah. I mean, yeah, I guess it was like a slow. So did you move? I mean, I know you went to grad school in Illinois, right? So I don't know if that's similar to where you grew up, like not that
Yeah, it
far.
was like cornfields everywhere. I
It was,
worked,
okay.
yeah,
Because
oh
I was
for
gonna say, I
sure.
know some parts of Illinois are really connected to Chicago, and then that's like a different thing.
This was like the downstate university in
Yeah.
Champaign-Urbana, so it was pretty rural,
And did you move from grad school to New York?
pretty directly. Yeah, yeah.
Okay,
I
yeah.
was lucky. I had my sister was living in New York, and she her husband's good friend had a wood shop, and so the first week I came, I had this gig working in a wood shop.
Oh,
And then I
nice.
stayed. It was great. Yeah, it was awesome. I would have stayed, but I wanted to meet art people, so I got into this guy that worked at that shop, got me this art handling job for a grading company, and then I started working jobs like that, and then got into galleries and stuff. But then you really meet a lot of people that way. Just being working in the arts is really it's
Yeah.
great for that.
Yeah. So you had more like the direct experience because I feel, I went to grad school in Detroit, which I love, like I love Detroit and was really interested in staying there, but then, ended up doing these residencies and went like a different direction and then was in Baltimore and also like loved Baltimore, still have like the fondest memories of Baltimore. And so I had these experiences of these two like really interesting, I guess you could call them like mid-sized cities, but cities that had that um, kind of post-industrial Rust Belt kind of thing going on where there was just like a lot of space for new life, and new art and music and like really fun, like artist driven and artist created scenes. And so that felt like, I mean, I just feel really grateful for all my time spent in those places. And so that was like my transition to New York, but definitely to scale. I mean, nothing's like the scale of New York. And yeah, I do feel like there's perpetual comparison for me with those like feelings, I guess, from growing up in a place that's just very spacious, like very spacious and very quiet. And my family's still there, so I'm still very connected and I return to that. I feel like I have a need to return to that landscape, even from like upstate New York, which of course it's like much like quieter here compared to the city, but that like openness and sparseness of
Of South Dakota in particular.
plain.
Yeah.
Yeah, that whole kind of region and like biome. I just feel like, it's probably true that people just wherever you grow up kind of becomes like an imprint. And I love the ocean. I think partially because of that, also just that expanse and just seeing the horizon. Like a lot of my work has like referenced horizons, like the night sky full of stars, and also I think just in like more subtle ways, just like that feeling of openness, emptiness, the kind of scale shift of like kind of feeling yourself against um when you just literally like they call it like, the big sky, like when you can just see so far, like I just think that there's like a feeling to that that I definitely in the city, just was very aware of the sky showing up as a like perforated grid or something
Yeah.
because we're
Yeah.
seeing these
Yeah.
little patches between buildings.
So you grew up on a farm in South Dakota, right?
I did, yeah.
What did your family produce?
It's a fourth generation dairy farm, which my brother and my dad are both there doing that, but my brother now is more interested in produce. So he like grows produce
Oh, that's
and
cool.
sells it at farmers market and restaurants and grocery stores and such.
Oh,
Yeah.
awesome. That's
Yeah.
awesome. That's great. So after well, you grew up in South Dakota, you went to undergraduate in Minnesota, right?
I went to undergraduate in Minnesota, went to grad school in Detroit,
So
and
what were you doing in undergrad? Were you painting?
I was never really, like study painting, but no, I was not. I would
I
say I really lucked out my undergrad because I would say I was like pretty aimless. I knew I loved art. I knew I mean, another thing that I feel I really appreciate about my upbringing is just that it wasn't, I was not, as you might imagine, saturated with exposure to the arts. And and I just kind of love that because it was just kind of pure naivete and like personal interest, and it was just my little like escape, I suppose, and my not really escape, but escape, yes, but like my just way of processing the world. And I didn't have like aspirations beyond that. And so in my somewhat yeah, aimless lack of life plan. I just happened to end up at this liberal arts school that had a really great kind of like strong conceptual art program, and I really connected with many of my professors there. And so I actually made a lot of books at that time, and I did like a lot of printmaking, and I mean, I feel like the thread that I kind of still see in my work was just like an interest in exploring material and kind of the yeah, material and process and like the a way of kind of yeah, like dancing with concepts, bringing concepts into form like through. So there was like a lot of different. I was just using different materials, I guess, for like different ideas as I still do, and that seemed that seemed to be a good fit for that program.
So who are some early influences and who are some influences people you still think about now?
Mm,
Artists, writers, philosophers, anything?
yeah, the like just like an artwork that I think about all the time is E's Klein Leap into the Void. You picture that?
Yeah,
Which he
yeah.
published as a newspaper. He like printed that image, like he like made a newspaper for that image. And I guess for anybody listening that it doesn't totally like call it to mind, it's the artist is leaping from a window, like a sort of tall-ish building, like leaping from the window, and it's like this moment where he looks like perhaps he's about to defy gravity, fly to outer space, or perhaps fall to his death. And it's this like yes, moment of possibility between the two.
He's a great artist.
Yeah, he's a great
Yeah.
artist. I feel like all of his just shenanigans. I guess I like the sort of yeah artist who you're like, is that art or like what? What is that?
But
And
he can
just
still make beautiful
playful,
objects though, you know.
beautiful. It made
Yeah.
beautiful work and just seemed like just like playful and also like I think really deep. I think that yeah, work that is kind of like deep and profound while being silly really like has a place in my heart.
I totally agree. It's great. He made these little winged. Have you seen those winged victories? Those with the weave climbed blue. They're like small winged victory
No,
statues that he had.
actually, that doesn't, I don't think I know those.
I was working for a creating company that I mentioned earlier. My first art handling job, and they had one of those. Uh,
Did you get to
somebody
create an Yves Klein piece?
Well, unfortunately, it came to us in a million pieces because somebody tried to FedEx it. Somebody was trying.
Oh,
Yeah, it was the saddest thing. But then I thought about it
no.
later. I'm like, I think he might have thought that was funny,
He would
maybe, or
have
something.
loved it. I
Yeah,
think he would love it, especially that piece, like the way you
yeah.
described it, to FedEx it and
Oh,
distribute it. That's
perfect,
so good.
perfect. It was such a beautiful. He didn't. There were like other versions of the same piece. You know, other. It was like a series of those. But
Wow. I love
yeah,
that.
that was
Okay,
a
that's my new like favorite artwork as in its destroyed form.
yes, yes. It's like it's a one of a kind. It's like an accidental one of a kind thing.
Yeah. So was the idea to restore it?
That's a good question. I think we were supposed to recreate it.
Hmm.
Um, I think it was coming to the warehouse to be inspected after it had been shipped and broken. I'm not sure exactly the context. That was a wild job. We got to see like some really cool stuff. That was like uh, just kind of a horrid factory job in the job itself. But what we got to see was like it's like crazy stuff, like John Lennon's first guitar and a
Oh.
suit of samurai armor and all these
Oh, wow.
amazing painters from like all the Christie's auctions would come through there. So we got to see some really cool stuff. But I didn't even last 2 months. It was too
Yeah.
it was too much, man. You had to be there at 8 in the morning. I took 3 trains to get there from Bushwick.
Oh, I've been
Three
there.
every
I've
yeah
been
every
there. The like the train
oh,
show up at 8 and like yeah,
you get docked, you got to punch in, you get docked for lunch,
right.
and then so you leave there at 4:30, do it all. I'm just like I can't, it's too much. And then I got the job at David's Werner after that as the handyman,
Yeah.
which
Which
was like the best job in that context. Just relative to that, it was like the best job ever.
yeah, well there you go.
Which it wasn't, but it felt like it felt like it
Yeah.
compared to the creating job, you know.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, okay, that's like the beauty of yeah, the art handling gigs, because that makes me think of my very like my early sort of it wasn't even really art handling, but like after undergrad, actually, before I went to grad school, I worked kind of briefly at a place that had it was like art storage facility. They did do like installation and stuff, but that wasn't what I was doing. I was like managing the inventory in the storage facility, and they actually when they brought me on, they had recently experienced a fire in the facility. And so they were dealing with, I was like, ended up dealing with like all this insurance stuff and people deciding whether to take like a total loss where they like destroy the piece or to try to have things conserved. But what was interesting about that was I got to see some like partially destroyed famous artworks, you know,
Wow.
like this Frank Stella that was like the shaped canvas and these, am I thinking of the right?
I
Yeah.
love those. Yeah, with like
These,
stripes.
yeah, these just
Yeah.
really yeah, very just like big presence, minimal, like bossy, minimal kind of works. And then it was just like half charred, like it had just been burned.
So was it perhaps more beautiful?
It was so good. I was like, this is so great.
Yeah.
Like, this is such a,
Yeah, there's I mentioned this in a previous conversation with the artist Paul Mogensen, how stuff is sort of with time or destruction or whatever you call, it just makes it more beautiful. Like there's this, did you ever see the Gerhard Richter painting documentary?
I don't think I did.
It's quite good. It's just basically just him paint. It's exactly what it is. It's just him painting. So it's a little slow, but if you're interested in painting and Gerhard Richter, it's
Yeah.
worth watching. But there's one scene where he has this uh image of a Greek statue, and it's like half of the face is destroyed or worn down or eroded through time, and he was sort of pondering whether it's uh beautiful despite the destruction or because of the destruction.
Wow. Yeah, I mean, whenever you see those like that era in museums, you know, at the Met or whatever, and you're looking at these sculptures that are missing limbs and yeah, are broken, like so interesting. How can that not be like the most interesting part?
Yeah, yeah, like the Winged Victory, for
Yeah,
example. It's back to
yeah,
that, right?
yeah.
Yeah. It's masterful, and who knows? I mean, if you saw it in its original form, I don't know if you would have the same response.
Right. Yeah.
Mm. So, what are you working on now? What are you excited about in the studio?
So, I'm continuing the project that I was describing before that with paper marbling. And I, as mentioned, have been obsessed with having something to say about, yeah, the experience of pregnancy and birth and motherhood. I think especially like early motherhood, which is kind of, I feel, its own like universe. And so, yeah, I really struggled for a long time with how to do that. And I wanted to, you know, thinking of that project as it is, like using these sounds from outer space and the deep sea, like these cosmic, distant, like just the farthest distance of our contact with the natural world, with our environment. Like I wanted to somehow bring in um, sounds that are close at hand or materials that are close at hand. So I'm still working with like making my own ink out of um, like plant, you know, like plants that are like just near me, like just wanting to use like things that are like close at hand and kind of wanting to bring in this element of like the intimacy of that. Um, but that's been really tricky. And so then I started working with, I was like, maybe I need to have like sounds that are just like, yeah, the sounds around me. And so I was working with birdsong and I came across this like wonderful archive of birdsong, including some extinct birdsong. So these sounds that were recorded, actually, it's like it's interesting. It's just like interesting kind of visual because these scientists went out like in the 30s to do a basically like cross country tour of places where endangered birds could be found and they were capturing sounds and it's like the earliest recording equipment. There are like these great photos of these people with their like extremely huge like clunky you know, like like recording equipment. And so they created this archive. And unfortunately now, like since that time, some of the birds had become extinct. So I was thinking about like the time of these recordings, which is kind of like the 30s, 40s, 50s to now. And it kind of makes like a human like a robust human timeline, you know? And thinking about my daughter and thinking about like what will the world look like, you know, when she's my age or when she's like older at the end of her life. And
Like what, right, what birds now will you not hear when she's an
totally,
adult? Yeah.
I mean, like a very depressing, you know, mental exercise, but like interest, I mean, you just sort of like you have to become interested in that and you have to become, I mean, I think like I already was interested in that subject, but it just becomes all the more compelling when you're like, truly, this person is going to be here, you know, past me. What will it be like? And yeah, so I was trying to use those sounds in this process. And they didn't really work. It wasn't really like it just wasn't really working. And then I realized like that's not like they don't need to be translated. Like I feel like these other sounds have this like mysterious element that the translation is like an interesting part of it. And so that has spun off into a different project that I'm actually like so excited about, but I maybe won't get into now because it's like very much in its beginning phase. But so yeah, there's this whole project using like extinct birdsong basically, which very much grew from my experience of like pondering new life. But then I realized that what I wanted to add to this series I've been making so far is the sounds of like sounds in utero. And so I have a good friend who recently had her baby and she recorded her son's heartbeat in utero. And I've been working with that and making these paper marbling pieces, having that be like the sound vibration. And I realized that it's like to me, that's the sound that is like equally mysterious, like equally kind of gets at this, you know, thinking of outer space, the deep sea, like thinking of these yeah, places that we don't know very much about. Like we're so interested in trying to learn more about them, but like actually it's really interesting, like the deep sea, how much we actually don't know. And it's of course teeming with life. And and so yeah, so the heartbeat in utero, you know, feels like it's also this place that we are like interested in studying, but like you like we know so much, but we kind of like don't know. We kind of like don't know what exactly is happening in that
It's kind of like this hidden universe, right?
the hidden universe, and it also feels both deep sea and outer space.
And there's a real mystery in all these places and that too. Like how is that even even looking at a seed or considering a seed and taking a seed and growing. I'm sprouting my own plants right now, which I haven't done before. I've used starters before for tomatoes and peppers and herbs and things, but
Yeah.
we got a bunch of seeds, so we started growing from seed. I'm just like contemplating how miraculous it is to take this tiny little thing with whatever genetic material it has, and then just giving it sunlight and water, and then it grows into this marvelous fruiting plant.
It never
You know,
gets old, that moment that it like sprouts. I feel like in times when I've tried to do that, I always like lose faith a little bit. I'm like, is it working?
yeah.
And then like one day it like pops up.
It's amazing. It's
It
miraculous. Truly, you
is.
could see it. Yeah, yeah. But I get a sense you're really so I love you're really interested in these internal and external mysteries, and you're really feel like you're like crafting with ideas. Would you say that's accurate?
Yeah, yeah, definitely. Internal and external mysteries. I like that.
There's a lot there. There's really a lot to contemplate, and I love the way you're taking this idea and then letting it sort of become its own thing. You know, as an object or as another idea and a different object. And so there's a real like sense of exploration happening here in your work.
Yeah. Yeah, that's the fun of it.
So you were saying that motherhood has definitely had an impact on your work, how you're thinking about work, leading to these new projects. Just on a practical level, is it more difficult to find the time, or do you find the time you have is more valuable, so you use it in a different
Yeah.
way? Or
Yeah, both are true. It's definitely well, I would say hard to find time, but I'm just choosing to I mean, hard to find time. That's fair to say, but I'm also choosing to privilege this time to be with my daughter. But yeah, also it's also true that for sure, like I feel um you might find this even just with, when you have a job, like that there's sort of a longing to get to your studio, And I feel like there is something good about having that like build up a little bit and then you get to feel, yeah, kind of like focused and excited when the opportunity comes. So I do feel like I yeah, like use my time more intentionally. But then also like it's just always changing. I feel like that's the part that is pretty tricky is there just the routine, the necessary routine of life is just kind of constantly shifting. And so yeah, so it's just always changing
It's on somebody else's terms, right?
on somebody else's terms. Absolutely.
Do you have any advice for anyone who wants to live a creative and fulfilling life, maybe particularly somebody who is a new parent?
Hmm. Um, I'm very skeptical of advice because, so here's my advice. I think you should think of yourself as the like extremely idiosyncratic individual that you are, and what works for one person might not work for another person. But I think I want to say to people that are new parents, is that what you said? New parents, well, I really want to see the art that you make, new parents. Like, I'm very interested in new parent art. I'm like very, very interested. And so, I guess that's my just wish and dream for such people that they will find a way to make that work.
That's good. That's good. I like that you say that the best advice is no advice, right?
I
That
mean,
we all want a quick, oh, it's like this, but we're all different. We're all working on our own sort of, we're all on our own journey, right?
yeah,
And you can learn from other people certainly, but I think you have to consider what's valuable to you.
totally. And I think if you do like feel like you need advice, to get advice from 10 different people and then
Yeah.
choose choose from that.
Yeah, that's good.
Or I guess another way is just to like listen to your instinct and feel free to discard the advice of other people because it could easily not apply to you.
That's good. I listen to these Dharma talks, and the monks often end their talks by saying, if this was useful to you, feel free to use it. If not, you can leave it. So I think
That's somebody worth listening to right there. I feel like the fact that they say that, I'm like, okay, you're qualified to give advice if you kind of are aware of that like element of it.
absolutely, and that I think the experts will always say they don't know. They don't know.
Yeah, right? It's true.
Well, it's been wonderful to talk, and I thank you again for talking today, for chatting today. Do you have anything else you want to add, or where can people find you?
Yeah, people can find my website if they're interested in, being invited to shows and such. I would love for them to sign up on my mailing list through my website. Otherwise, I'm on Instagram a little bit, and I feel like things get missed there a lot, but find me on Instagram as well.
Wonderful. Thank you again.
It's always great talking to you, Dan.
Been a pleasure. You as well.
Thanks.